Our first guest of the morning is Representative John Rose, Republican of Tennessee. He serves on the Financial Services Committee, joining us to talk amongst many things, a look into Chair Powell and his actions. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show this morning.
Well, thank you for coming on. What do you think about this attention that's been paid to the Federal Reserve Chair?
Well, I think it's always good for these organizations, and particularly the Federal Reserve, because of the intended independence of the Fed, but that doesn't mean that they're above being watched over to make sure they're being prudent and careful, frugal, even I might say, with their use of the resources that are ultimately really the resources of the American people.
Is this strictly about building or the construction project at the Federal Reserve, or as Democrats would say, or even some Republicans would say, this goes further to limit the Fed's independence? How would you square that?
I think the answer truly is that we don't know, because obviously an investigation by the Justice Department, they haven't revealed what the basis for that is at this point. We probably wouldn't know about this investigation at this point were it not for Chairman Powell himself reporting or releasing that he had been notified that he was the object of an investigation. So we really don't know what the predicate for the investigation is, but many surmise that it relates to the building project and his Senate testimony about that.
You wrote on X, when talking about this issue, you said this DOJ inquiry isn't about petty disagreements or interest rates. Can you elaborate why you think that is?
Well, it would be inappropriate for it to be about that. So I presume they have what would be an appropriate objective for the investigation, and it's yet to see what that is. Obviously, every president since the Fed has been created has attempted to influence them either directly or subtly in some way, and this president is no different. So that's where the speculation comes from. I think that perhaps there's a different motive. And I guess history will judge whether that's true or not. There may be some problem here, and one would presume that there's at least suspicion of that.
You serve on financial services. How do you think about the tenure of Chair Powell? And particularly, do you think he's independent from being swayed by the president or other forces?
Well, I don't think any Fed chair is fully independent of the influence of the president. The president has a lot of power. I think, unfortunately, Fed Chairman Powell missed the call in the early days of the Biden administration, when the profligate spending of the Biden administration was heating up the economy, ultimately leading to the serious inflation that we had, the worst in my adult lifetime. We had the Fed chairman in those days. He has to come and testify before our committee twice annually, and we had him there, and many of us were prodding him at the time, saying, don't you think inflation is going to be a problem? Don't you think it's time for you to do something about it? Of course, he can't control what was happening on the fiscal side, so all of that government spending was building heat in the economy that was going to lead to inflation. And what I think the Fed chairman mentioned or missed at the time was that once that inflation was in place, which is the nature of inflation, we saw it in the Carter inflation of the 1970s and 80s, is that it becomes a psychology, and it's hard to then put it back in the box once it's out. And so, at the time, he described it as transitory, and he latched on to the narrative at that time that the inflation was just transitory, and many in the Biden administration tried to say that as well. What later he admitted is that it was not transitory, and it's still with us. And just as was the case in the 1980s, once inflation psychology sets in, it sometimes takes years to completely kind of remove it from the psyche of the populace and to get it out of the economy. And that's what we're experiencing now. Even though I think the policies of the Trump administration will ultimately subdue those inflationary pressures, and I think have already done a lot to do that, I think it takes time. In the 80s, it took most of that decade before we got inflation tamed.
In this new inquiry, this new investigation by the Department of Justice, your chair, French Hill, said he quoted as saying it's an unnecessary distraction. What do you think of that characterization coming from your chairman?
Sure. Well, I think he's talking about the penumbra, the aura around the entire situation, that it's a distraction from other issues. For example, Chair Powell should be coming to testify before our committee soon. This may delay that. I think there's been some discussion that it would delay that testimony, and so that's a distraction from us handling the business that we need to. The President's right on the cusp of naming a new Fed chair. From all appearances, he's made it clear it probably will not be reappointing Powell. And so I think it just gets in the way of winding down this whole discussion. However, it doesn't change the fact that if there's the basis for an investigation, then one should be conducted.
Representative John Rose is our guest.